Welcome back to The Mentors. This is Vadim.
And Sergey.
And you're listening to a show where we tell stories of ordinary people that became extraordinary entrepreneurs despite lack of experience, money, or connections.
And today on the show, we are incredibly excited to bring you our interview with Rodney Williams. Rodney is an incredible guy that we recently got introduced to, and we just had to have him on the show. Shout out to our producer, Jackie Canoyer, for finding and getting Rodney on, because I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. He is the founder of LISNR, which is a technology company that he started in 2012 that basically uses ultrasonic technology to transfer data, and there's so many applications to it. We're going to get into all of that. It's an incredible piece of technology, but what's even more incredible is what he's been able to do with this business in a relatively short period of time. So Rodney started this company originally in Cincinnati, and he built his team there. He raised funding there. He really leaned into that network that he built in that city. And now he's based in Oakland. And this episode is really about a couple of different things. One, it's about identifying markets that are ripe for disruption and figuring out how to conquer them one at a time. This episode is about how you adapt and you move from market to market and you figure out how to penetrate new areas, new verticals at a very rapid pace. It's about how you attract the right kind of team that can help you execute on a big, audacious technology concept.
A lot of people know examples like Facebook, who that wasn't the first social network but ended up being the biggest one, or Uber, that wasn't the first ride-sharing concept but ended up dominating the market. Some ideas come into the market so early that the markets aren't ready for them. And so in this case, actually, as you hear through the story, when Rodney Williams was trying to bring LISNR to the market, he had a big, audacious goals of where the business could go, how much impact his company could have. But he couldn't quite start by executing exactly on his vision right away. The first step was getting one part of the market, and as you'll hear, it was the music industry. And slowly but surely, over 7 years, eventually the market became ready for him. And now, as you'll hear in part 2 of our interview with Rodney, the potential for his technology is incredible.
And as you'll hear through the interview, Rodney is a really thoughtful and knowledgeable guy when it comes to brand building. I think there's a real reason why he was successful with this company. He has built up a strong foundation of knowledge, as you'll find out, that really enabled him to hit the ground running almost immediately with his business. But he also grew the business and started the business while still in a full-time job. And so he mitigated risk almost immediately. And we talk a lot in this show about how you should mitigate risk when you start something. So we're going to get into all of that and much more in the next 25 minutes or so. And then next week in part 2 of how he's taking this huge business and making it even bigger by disrupting the market in an even bigger way. We're going to find out exactly how he's doing that today.
Please enjoy this episode with Rodney Williams of LISNR.
Rodney, one thing that I'm wondering about, because there's a lot of articles there around what you're doing with LISNR and podcasts certainly that people can listen to, but Vadim and I always are curious about the origin of when somebody first realizes that they could be an entrepreneur or could be a leader. So can you talk a little bit about, when you realized that about yourself?
When did I realize that about myself? I think probably a couple parts. One part, my mom used to have a beauty shop, and I thought it was a good idea to lease magazines that weren't necessarily there to her customers. It actually worked out okay. And I would tell you that the second part was probably playing sports. I played football mostly, and I wasn't good. And I think when you're not good, you can do a couple of things. I decided to be good at like the intangible stuff. I worked out, I was real disciplined, and then people followed that type of behavior. So I think those two things are really fundamental in how I figured, number one, obviously you can see an opportunity like selling magazines, but more importantly, being disciplined in your approach. People tend to follow people like that.
What is it about, let's say, even when your mom was running that beauty shop and you had that magazine idea, can you point maybe to how your mom raised you or your own personality that gave you this idea that, okay, I see this opportunity, I'm just going to try it? Basically gave you the ability to try something that doesn't quite exist and the confidence that maybe it'll work.
Yeah, my parents were entrepreneurs. I come from a Caribbean family. So my mom, had the beauty shop in the basement. She was also a registered nurse. She probably also sold cooked dinners on the weekend. So maybe she had a catering business. That was the extent. Dad had multiple jobs as well. So I was used to that type of behavior. I think that one of the things that my parents did is that all the money I made, I kept. And they wouldn't necessarily influence the decisions that I made with it. And so for me, it was also a sense of ownership, a sense of autonomy. But definitely, I think those were things that were important. I just remember there was definitely a moment where I was like, oh, there's small business entrepreneurs, and then there's big business entrepreneurs. And I had clearly made an example of I didn't want to be a small business entrepreneur. I didn't want to copy. And I'm not saying a restaurant is a copy, but fundamentally, the business model of a restaurant is fundamentally the same. I wanted to do something completely unique. And that's also what catapulted me to technology.
And we obviously will get to how the idea for a listener came about, giving you background. But, Sergey and I truly believe that everyone's born an entrepreneur, in that, when we're young, we like to explore and play. And sometimes that's kind of beaten out of us through school, or maybe conservative parents that a little bit more risk averse, let's say. But it sounds like you were empowered to experiment, to try things for the small businesses that your parents were involved in, and also encouraged by letting keep the money as well. But you ended up taking a pretty traditional route. Well, someone would probably think about it as traditional, in that you obviously went to college. You ended up getting, I think, was it 4 degrees?
Yes.
4 degrees. You started working for Lockheed Martin, and then eventually ended up at Procter & Gamble, which was a massive company. So you went kind of the secure route in the very beginning. Why did you decide to do that? Why didn't you jump into entrepreneurship, into that big entrepreneurship thing that you wanted to do earlier on in college?
So I'm going to say what I always called it. I mean, I always had a side hustle. I think I went from magazines to penny candies in school. You can sell penny candy for 5 cents. So good profit margin. I went to high school and I was throwing parties. I was making, my one friend, he could make these T-shirts. I was like, I think we can sell that. So I was always that type of person. And for me, I just didn't find my thing. My actual first thing, I had a friend whose dad owned a series of grocery stores. And I wrote up a proposal in high school that we should do. And at the time, applications were limited. But I said, home delivery of a restaurant can be extremely profitable. It can be a better business if we can figure it out. That was probably my first attempt to do something super duper disruptive. I remember I wrote the same model for cars. And then I was like, you know what? Obviously, this kid from Baltimore doesn't have the necessary means to get to the right folks. And for me, what school was about, and every school that I've ever been to, I created a network, and my network grew. So for me, I needed to go to a school somewhere different. I wanted a new network. I wanted to be around new people. And these are the experiences that I'm going to do to learn to figure out what my thing is. Yeah.
Gotcha. So essentially, you were trying to almost hedge against the risk of the next business failing by building your network and also getting the education to be better prepared for the next thing once you figured it out.
Yeah. So, one of my education wasn't to be a designer or an engineer. All my education was specifically designed to see an opportunity and have what it takes to build it and launch it. Everything about it. I was a business undergrad, so I did a bachelor's in business administration and finance. I did my Bachelor of Arts in economics. Then I did an integrated marketing degree. And then when I did my MBA, I did supply chain. So people were like, oh, you want to do, no, I don't want to work for a warehouse. Dude, I wanted to understand supply. I obviously had marketing, supply, and then I wanted to understand finance. And then from an economics of scale, I wanted to understand markets and being able to see those things. And my idea, and even when I went to work at Procter & Gamble, I pitched myself as that type of person, right? I'm much more of an athlete, right? I have the ability to see things that other people see. I can have intelligent conversations about it. I can work cross-functionally. And then I'm I have a higher enough risk profile to make a decision. And that combination is actually really, really, it is an entrepreneur when you think about it, right? A really good entrepreneurs, I think, assess environments better than others. And I think they have a good sense of risk. I think they understand the ability to build teams. And then I also understand when they have to be complete jerks.
Yeah, that is the hard part. But sometimes nobody else wants to do that part of the job, so you have to.
Exactly.
So you branded yourself as this like forward-thinking, cross-functional guy with a different expertise and a technology expert. And at Procter & Gamble, I believe you spent 5 years, right? And you were working on basically distributing what they were doing through technology. You were filing patents. You worked on the Pampers brand. And it's actually pretty unique, I think, that you worked in a marketing function there, even though you didn't necessarily have that experience. But how did you then, because you had so many potential opportunities you could have pursued during that time while you were absorbing and learning, how did you hone in on this particular opportunity as the one to go all in on?
I got another rule. I tell people all my ideas. If it's good enough, people pay attention. They ask you questions about it. They continue to ask you questions. If it's not that good, then it's not that good. So, me having ideas continued while I was at Procter & Gamble, and some of those ideas end up being ideas in the company that made the company a lot of money. Majority of the ideas did that, right?
The company being Procter & Gamble. You made them a lot of money.
Then I started to think, obviously, right? You write this patent, you do this good project, you grow the brand by 1 or 2%, everyone gets bonuses, it's great, but you get a little plaque, right? So, I was just like, maybe I should think about some other things. And in that process, I had the idea of LISNR, and I started to bring it up in different conversations. And the feedback was incredible, was strong. Even my closest friend became my co-founder, who was an entrepreneur and the CEO of his company. It took him about 2 days. And then I remember in 48 hours, he was like, oh my God, I think this could be big. So those are the type of things that I do in the beginning. And you got to understand, when you do that, you're actually brainstorming a little bit. Because they're going, wow, that's great. But you know what? That business model has some issues. Wow, that is awesome. But you're going to have to figure out how to potentially launch that. Or, that technology doesn't exist. You're going to have to figure out how to create that technology. So I started to get this feedback. And also, a lot of those people became my co-founders, right? So that's what I did in the beginning, and that's how I was able to differentiate it. And I gave myself a milestone. I went on a startup competition called the Startup Bus. I did well. I came back. Some investors were interested. I gave myself 3 months. If I could do XYZ in 3 months, I was out.
And what was that XYZ that you decided?
So one of the things there's a theme here there's a theme here in my life, at least, where I learn, I ask questions, I test, and I try again. In that process, the first investors that I ever spoke to, they gave me really strong feedback. They said, if I saw these things, we would invest. Obviously, this widespread technology is a little wide, but focusing on maybe a music vertical to launch, and if you get a music partnership, we'll give you $50,000. And then he said, if you get another $50,000, we'll give you $150,000 more. That's basically what happened. And then they wanted us to patent it and things like that. So we went through that process, and then 3 months later, we showed up with the music partnership. We showed up with the all of the IP, and we got $50,000. And then a week later, we got the other money. So, how did that all happen? There's a lot of things that happened in between that part. But again, instead of we didn't build anything. We were in a startup competition. We didn't really have anything, but we met someone that gave really strong feedback on what he thought success would look like for a seed round, or at least to start raising it. And some people, sometimes we have this idea and we go so deep in it. MVP, but we go so deep in the idea before ever talking to an investor. And I don't actually technically agree with that. In the second venture that I've co-founded, we were talking to investors day one. So that's just more my style.
Interesting. So in those 3 months, it sounds like, given the feedback, the important aspect was securing a music partnership, and that's the vertical that you picked to focus on first. Did you have contacts at this point in that industry, or did you have to start from scratch, and what did you do to close that deal?
So I didn't have any concrete contacts. I think what I had was I had a friend of mine who was trying to get into the music industry, and he was somewhat connected. And I remember someone saying, just get a meeting with him. Start off the week out in LA, get a meeting with him, and then ask for him to make introductions to other people. Mm-hmm. So we took a little risk. We went out there I scheduled a trip to LA for about a week. I didn't necessarily I had one meeting scheduled with this person. And at the end of the meeting, I showed him a demo of what we could do in music. And I said, is there anyone else you would like to speak to? That turned into, us getting into Warner Brothers office and Atlantic's office. And then it was somehow we ended up at Atom Factory, and then we met Nas, and that became our first partner in music.
Now, aside from the investor telling you that this would be an initial first application, what indication did you have that it could be interesting? Because I'm still trying to kind of frame in my head how you even thought of that technology and how you connected the dots of the two different applications. So just to level set for our listeners, the technology is basically a way to send data using sound, right? So first of all, how did you even think of that? Because you're technical, but you're not an engineer. Mm-hmm. So how did that idea come about? And then how did you hone in on that application? Was it really just that investor telling you that that's a good idea?
Yeah, what happened is that there were early companies trying to do things with sound. One of them became a big company. It was a company called Shopkick. And it was actually like a coupon-based platform. When you enter the store, you would get pushed a coupon. The initial technology that was pushing the coupons was actually ultrasonic audio. For me, I was in retail. Of course, I know about Shopkick. So for me, it was top of mind. And the next level of exploration was, what can this ultrasonic thing, what else can it do? So that was the question that went down a long, dark road of, wait a minute, the technology is in its infancy. Right now, it's just an ID. There's some indication that this could be a protocol. But I could take some of these similar IDs, put it in music, and this can be like a multi-dimensional platform where we can track music based on ultrasonic tags. We can then trigger things based on ultrasonic tags. And technically, it was a more powerful solution in music than fingerprinting and watermarking like Shazam. And, we got to that determination by, at the end of the day, like we all thought it was much bigger than that. But, as investors said, is that you got to figure out your focus and just deliver on that one thing and do that one thing well enough to get to the next place. And that was our goal. Our goal was just, okay, let's just do one thing. We're going to build this mobile app and this platform, and it's going to offer engagement and analytics to music companies. There was not much information about send data versus ultrasonic. They would say, oh, wow, how are you doing that? Because I would go in there, play music, and the phones would light up. I said, well, we're using ultrasonic smart tones. It does all these things. And they would be like, wow, that's fantastic. That's new. That's good. Let's move forward. So that was the pathway. But again, we didn't technically build anything at that point yet. We had a rough MVP by the time we made our LA trip, enough to demo it and get a partner.
I think that's important for our listeners to understand, that every step of the way you were able to secure fundraising, close these partnerships, because you prove to them your ability to execute, and you show to them that you could do these things. You, by the MVP that you created, even though maybe it wasn't a product yet, you impressed them by sending the push notification or whatever it was, to show what the technology could do by showing your investors that you can build a relationship in the music industry or whatever industry you want to attack. Before I ask you the next question, I just want to know that from what I read, you started the company while you were at Procter & Gamble?
Yes, I was still there.
And then did you quit your job when you made it into the bus?
No, I quit the job when I got my term sheet.
Okay.
Yeah, so so the bus was around March, right around South by Southwest time period. And then we probably got our term sheet in the beginning of August. And I was able to leave the end of August.
Now, it sounds like the way you won that first partnership is by building this exciting prototype that did something cool and people thought, hey, it's cool, it's forward thinking, it's new tech, let's do it. How did you know what to build first? And then how did you get the team to actually build that first initial version that wowed your first partners, these music partners?
You know, we learned a lot going on that startup competition. It was almost like startup boot camp, right? And so we learned some fundamental things and got some really strong feedback around the music and focusing in that particular area. If this was an engagement tool or if this was an analytics tool. You know, for us, you got to look at market dynamics. Music industry at that time period was suffering a bit. Revenue was down because they were moving from single song sales to streaming products. And so discretionary budgets for marketing and fan engagement wasn't there. So the kicker was that we were going to go out and sell to brands. And who else sells better to brands than a former brand manager, right? Now, how did that all make sense? I looked at the market. I see that they were exposed. I looked at my skills and my network and see what was the best thing that I could sell at the time. And at that time, we basically said that. So when we launched, we actually had a lot of decent amount of artists. From labels would give us artists and give us content. We would tag it, and then based on the engagement, we would sell brands the inventory, and it would perform, and it was like a custom campaign buys that were really, really premium. It was able to give us $1 million in revenue in a year. So again, was the market opportunity in this thing huge? But for our investors, they were like, wow, okay, they're executing, and in the back of our mind. Actually not the back of our mind, we were really perfecting the tech, right?
And just for people that are listening, inventory basically means audience and traffic. Where specifically, what was the source of that traffic? Where was it coming from?
It was a mobile application. So we sourced the traffic, or we promote the traffic. It was easy, right? We had content that no one else had, and you had to listen to music or put your phone near things with sound to unlock it. Everything you put near it that had our tag allowed you to unlock it. When you unlocked it, it was brought to you by a brand.
But more specifically, how did you actually source that content?
Through the relationships with labels and the record companies.
Got it. Makes sense.
So, you know, I mean, Nas was one of the first, right? It went from Nas to Rock Nation. It went to then Warner and then to Atlantic. So we did things with Jason Derulo, to Meek Mill, to J. Cole, Shakira. And like, you know, who paid for Shakira was T-Mobile. I remember Budweiser did a bunch of things for people. So these are the examples of how we were doing it. And again, at that time, I also knew that, you know, brands weren't digitally savvy as they needed to be. So it was a lot of money being thrown at digital campaigns that provided a more intimate experience.
That's true. I also spent some time in the advertising industry, and it's still kind of a mess. Even with ad tech, the industry had consolidated in some ways just because there's so much fraud going on in there. But I know that around 2013, you ended up raising close to $1 million, right? 850,000, something like that.
Yeah, the full seed round became just $850,000.
$850,000. And things were going pretty well. You identified a niche that worked. You were generating revenue. But there's another part of the story where at some point there was kind of a gap in terms of you didn't have as much cash flow or funding, and you actually had to start paying the bills and making payroll out of pocket. What happened there, and what gave you the confidence to do that? I mean, I read that you just had the vision that things were going to work out, and it was a timing thing. But still, that's a pretty big risk to take.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the simple answer. For some reason, I have a lot more clarity today, so I can speak to a little bit more clarity. I think even though we were having success in music, I didn't believe in music or this model for music.
Why not?
I couldn't predict when the budgets was going to get fatter, right? It was very seasonal, very campaign driven, and talent is very, like, you know, you could have an artist in the platform that wasn't that great, then it would fundamentally perform low. It was just too many intangibles. But more importantly, it's not what I ultimately wanted to do anyway. So for me, it was about executing on the plan. And the plan was the ultrasonic tech needed to get better because it needed to stand on its own.
That's it for part 1 of our interview with Rodney Williams. As you could tell from this interview so far, there's a lot you can do as long as you're resourceful, before quitting your full-time job or before raising millions of dollars, to validate your idea, to get customers, to start figuring out how you're going to tackle the market. And once you do get that traction, things start kind of coming together. Part 2 of our interview, he'll dive deeper into how they pivoted into different markets, continue to grow and generate millions and millions of dollars of revenue, and how now they're disrupting the payments industry with some massive partnerships that they've closed in the past year. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.